start. Hey everyone, and welcome to We Should Talk About This, the show where we dive into unfiltered conversations about business, work, and life. I'm your host, Amy Seddon, and I'm here with my brilliant co-host, Nilofer Rao.
Ta-da! Hi, everyone. We started this podcast because honestly, these are the conversations we were already having late at night, over coffee, voice notes, and texts about everything from navigating careers to figuring out how to actually live a smarter, better life while realizing that the issues that we were all facing are the same across the world, whether you live in India, UAE, or the US.
Exactly. This is a space for real talk. No fluff, no pretending that we have it all figured out. Just two women working through the kinds of questions so many of us face. Should you go to business school? How do you get a raise? Is it ever a good idea to go into business with friends or family?
Or the big ones. How do you build generational wealth? Should you change your name after marriage? And what does success even look like when you're trying to carve your own path, not follow someone else's? So grab your coffee, your wine, your spreadsheet, whatever you need, and let's get into it.
All right, let's talk about what TV shows we're watching. Nilofer, are you watching anything interesting?
Is Chicago PD interesting?
I haven't watched Chicago PD since it first came out. So I don't really remember what's it about.
I like it. I love criminal procedural shows, but I'm especially into it because I love background music and background noise. So I'm on season 8. I have lost all interest in the characters.
Maybe I'll get back into it. I also really like crime shows. I feel like I've gone through a bunch of them and I paused on that.
But
Yeah.
What are you watching currently? Are you watching anything?
The show that I'm watching is called The Four Seasons. It's a new show, just came out on Netflix with Steve Carell and Tina Fey, which I don't know, maybe it's out in the UAE. It is.
I saw the trailer, but it was over the weekend, so we need to find time to watch it. How is it? Are you getting into it?
Yeah, we only watched one episode. I like that it's light and easy. It's very funny. Like Steve Carell, I just laugh at him every time I see him.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good so far. I need light, funny at the end of the day, nothing too intense. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of We Should Talk About This. Today we're diving into a topic that's equal parts thrilling and terrifying, applying to business school. We are going to discuss when we started our application process, our approaches to writing our essays, how we prepared for the GMAT, how we picked our recommenders, and the interview process. We're covering our own experiences in hope that our stories can resonate with our listeners. All right, so before we jump in, let's lighten this up a little bit and play a new game. It's called Cool or Not Cool Speed Round. Nilofer, are you ready?
I'm ready.
You're ready? Okay. All right, you go to a party and someone you first meet brings up what business school they went to. Cool or not cool?
Not cool unless and until you know them really well or have been talking to them for 2 hours.
Agreed. All right. What about asking your connections for mock interviews if you have at least had one conversation with them?
Very cool. I think it's very needed. That's why we go to business school.
Okay. This one's maybe a difficult one. Adding GMAT score on your LinkedIn profile.
I would not do it because I had a really bad score, but I think it's cool. If you had a great score, you should definitely flaunt it on your LinkedIn and go for it. So I think it's cool.
I think that's a hot take. I feel like it depends on the timeline or the age. At some point, if you're 20 years into your career, I don't know if you need your GMAT score still on your LinkedIn profile.
That's a very good point. So now your turn, Amy. And I do think you have a little bit more fun questions compared to mine. So are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Handing out business cards at alumni events.
Not cool. I don't even think physical business cards I didn't even think that they're a thing anymore. So don't bring them.
Getting a little tipsy at work events or school events.
All right. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I think this is cool. Like sometimes you just need to relax, make friends, get along with your coworkers. I would just be careful. Don't overdo it.
I agree. Okay, great.
Now that we've warmed up a little bit, let's talk about the business school application process. I know that it can definitely feel like you're training for a marathon, half marathon, whatever it is. You can't just like say you're going to go to business school and apply tomorrow and expect that it's all going to go smoothly. You definitely need to give it some time, think about it, and plan before you apply.
I agree. I think I found the application process to be so daunting and to be so scary. I gave it about 6 months from actually starting to prep for GMAT to finally giving the interviews. And even now, retrospectively, 6 years later, I feel like for me, at least 6 months was not good enough. And there were many times when I got stuck with how I should sell myself and my qualities to the school and make myself look more appealing as a package. So it was a very recurring question in terms of how do I make myself stand out to these amazing top schools?
I agree. I actually would say you might need like a year from preparing for the GMAT, taking the GMAT, and then doing all the other parts of the application process. I did 6 months too and probably rushed into it. But I would recommend for our listeners to plan for a year of preparing. It's definitely a very overwhelming process. It had me questioning all aspects of my life, my career. Why am I even applying? Why am I putting myself through this torture? Taking the GMAT, of course, was like one of the most difficult and annoying parts of the application. I knew that I wasn't going to score well, so I had to focus on strengthening other parts. How about you? How did you think about the GMAT?
I agree. I probably cried more about GMAT than I did about the rest of the process.
Me too.
And for our listeners, I agree with you, Amy, mainly because when you give yourself that year or a year and a half, you really give yourself more time to prep for GMAT. And in case you can, last I remember, you can take up to 5 times. You can give it five
Yeah.
times and they take your best score. So the longer you do it for, obviously don't stretch it too much, but the longer you do it, I think the more chances you have of retaking it and not putting that pressure on ourselves that you and I probably did. I actually signed up for Manhattan Prep, which is a very global sort of platform for MBA coaching and tutoring. So it was in person that I did in London, and the material at Manhattan Prep is supposed to be really good, particularly quant material. And I think the in-class setup really helped me understand how was I doing compared to a lot of the other people that were in the class. And obviously become friends and cry about the whole GMAT together as a group. And I would say that the most important thing that I found out about GMAT after I gave it and didn't ace it was that you really need to understand and learn the tricks of doing a problem in the shortest amount possible. And there are tons of them. So that is my biggest takeaway from GMAT from when I prepped for it.
I think that taking practice tests, like simulating an actual environment, is really helpful. There's all these different tips and tricks, and I would explore what works best for you. What else did you do, Nilofer, to prepare for the application?
Like you said, GMAT is the hardest and it's also a confidence breaker almost if you don't do well on it because it's the first thing that you do when you start that process. So in addition to preparing for GMAT, the second thing that I did was basically get a consultant. I had a consultant who helped me with my applications for business schools because I did know that GMAT would be my weakest point. And obviously, because I had very little experience writing essays and thinking about my life from a non academic point of
That's
view.
so interesting. I didn't know you hired a consultant. I'm curious, what was that experience like with the consultant? Was that person helpful?
Yes. I think short answer, yes. Highly recommend it. In fact, I was asking a few of my friends around, And a lot of people do get consultants, especially when you're working on multiple applications, because the time between the applications is so crunched. So you're working on multiple applications at the same time. And it's very difficult to think creatively about the same kind of content from a very different lens, because every school has very different focus, has a different way of asking a question, and so on and so forth. So for me, working with a consultant was very therapeutic. I have worked with him before for my master's application, and he has just been an absolute lucky charm for me. He knew me really well, and we had a great working rapport. And he not only helped me with strategizing my essays and like editing my essays, but it was also looking at my resume, helping me make it crisper, working on the interview prep with me. It was also, like I said, the therapeutic aspect. It was sitting me down and saying, you're lowballing yourself and you should apply to XYZ school, or saying, I think you're aiming a little too high, come back to the ground. And these are good schools that you can apply to finally, when I got admits, helping me make that decision between which school he thinks is a better choice for me. So I would say if you have the time, the money, and are willing to put in that effort to create that relationship with your consultant, you should 100% consider getting one.
Yeah, it sounds like getting a consultant can be very valuable, but I also think you don't necessarily need it. Like looking back for me, I leveraged my community, so my friends and my family, to help me through the process, to help me rank the schools or review the schools and then rank the schools I'd be applying to. And especially to like review the essays and the essay prompts because every school has so many essays.
For me, coming from, and I would imagine it's very stereotypical, in India, we do not have this system of writing essays and selling yourself almost to the school. It's very different setup. It's a standardized test, whether that's for your undergrad or even for your MBA. And so your score on that test accounts for majority of, let's say, the point system that they have or the quotas that they have for entering a college or MBA school. No one in my surroundings had really written an essay talking about failures they've experienced in life and extracurriculars that they have done and things they've learned out of it. It was really helpful to get a consultant and not rely on family and friends who don't necessarily have that experience. And it also helped me from that perspective of not relying on my network that has not been through the process or does not know a lot about the process, to really trusting a professional when it comes to it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't have that exposure in the US. Often applications are not just around the score, it's around the full picture, full package of the individual. So every school has multiple prompts that can be very overwhelming. I think some of it you can overlap, but I found each school has a very unique prompt that you need to cater to. I'm sure like now ChatGPT could probably help people applying for business school. We didn't have this at the time, so we just had to write our own essays and get other people to review it for us. For Stern, they had the typical traditional questions, which is like, why business school? What's your short term, long term goals? But they also had something called the Pick Six essay. It's a very interesting prompt where you have a blank canvas to describe yourself. I found it very refreshing and creative. And I did like a blank collage of my story where I added pictures and like a timeline of my experiences so far. I wanted to be authentically myself. I wanted to showcase the emotional intelligence and the relationships I've built and how I've traveled. And I'm really interested in learning different cultures and having new experiences. Actually, Nilofer, you were in my collage because we traveled the world before business school. We were in China together, we were in India together, and that was a big impact on my experience. What about you? What were the INSEAD prompts?
Well, before I get into INSEAD, I will say this, like, I would love to see that one day. So INSEAD has a bit of a rigorous process, not as creative as IU Stern, but we have 8 essays. And so 3 out of those 8 essays are very focused on your career. It's more around what have you done so far? What have you achieved in your career? What would you do what would your career look like if you were not pursuing your MBA? And what is your long-term goal for your career, regardless of the MBA? And then they really move it around and they're like, okay, like now that you have told us all about your career and your ambitions, tell us about yourself.
Mm.
And one that I found really interesting was around a failure that you've had in your life and what have you learned from it, in addition to obviously the extracurriculars and why INSEAD and long-term plans post INSEAD. So I'm not sure how valid those prompts are in today's process. It's been about 6 years since I did this, but they were quite thought-provoking, I would say that. And one of the tips that I would like to give up to our listeners is I have noticed that a lot of international students reach out to the alumni of the school. And it's always good to ask the alumni what class they liked, what club they liked, if there were any competitions that they liked, professors they liked. And I think in general, schools really like to know that you've put in that amount of effort to say, okay, you've put in that effort, we recognize it. And I think that really gives you some brownie points. So that is one tip that I would give for the essays. And then the second one, which is actually more maybe overall, is get a recommendation for a school if you can. And I would definitely recommend reaching out to a family member or a family friend. I haven't really seen it within a corporate setting, but I personally referred my family member to INSEAD. She's still currently pursuing her MBA at INSEAD. Not to say that it was all because of my recommendation. She's a great candidate. She had a great resume, great GMAT score. Everything was great, but just avoid any delay or any uncertainty. I just wrote to the admissions team saying she's, my family member and was part of my wedding where the entire INSEAD community basically came down, and I think she's a great fit and she did get in.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
So I'm quite curious. When did you apply to NYU? Is it like rolling admissions? For INSEAD, we have 4 rounds from what I can remember. And I was very keen to get my application in the first round, just because I'd heard that the earlier you put in your application, the better your chances of getting in. Was that your experience as well?
Yes, I agree. I applied to Stern in the first round, and I heard the same thing that you've heard, that getting your application in early, you have a higher chance of getting in. But I will say that I did apply later to some other schools. I just made like a rank of the ones that I was prioritizing. I applied early to the like top 3, and then I applied later for the other ones. I feel like it helps, but it's who knows what happens behind the scenes with the admissions committee.
That's the thing, right? I never understood it. So agreed. I'm glad that we're both aligned, as we are on many things in life, about the timeline process. What about recommendations? How did you approach the LORs and who did you reach out to?
Yeah, so for my recommenders, I chose 2 different people that I thought saw me in a different light or a different way. So my first recommender was my old boss, and I felt like she could really highlight my leadership experience and my work ethic in a corporate environment. And then I also chose a professor in my undergrad, was my accounting professor, and I felt like she can show the academic curiosity. I think this really depends on what you want to highlight. I chose to go like half work, half academic because I figured I'm going to business school. They probably want to see what I'm like in the classroom. What about you? What was your approach?
I wish I had stayed in touch with my undergrad professors. I might have had more options in terms of people that I wanted to reach out to.
I actually stayed in touch with a few of my professors. I built like friendships with them.
That's so important. And I think it's something that I wish someone had told me about when I was younger. So if anyone is in that age group, hot tip from Amy, you should stay in touch with your professors. They could be your future recommenders for business school. Going back to the LORs, I had a different approach compared to yours. INSEAD places a lot of emphasis on diversity in terms of experiences, cultures, backgrounds. And I think one of my selling points was literally my international experience at that time. And so I reached out to my ex-boss in US and then my current boss in the UK to show that I could navigate different countries and cultures and work seamlessly across all of them. My recommenders actually put in a lot of time and effort to do the LORs. They never really asked me for any bullet points or what do you want to put us? They never asked me for any examples, which I think is very different from my own experience of being a recommender. So I helped give a recommendation for someone who was applying to Columbia last year. And that candidate was just so particular in terms of what examples they wanted me to put, what strengths they wanted me to highlight. She made me write it on a Google Doc and then basically told me I like this and I don't like this. So I had to edit that. It was like a 2-day process that I went.
That's crazy to me. That's
Yeah.
maybe too controlling.
Yes. So I will say this, that it really just depends on you and what kind of a relationship you have with your recommender, but also the amount of time and effort they're willing to put into this process, because business schools are, even the recommendation process is so time consuming. I wonder how that went for you. Did your recommenders do it on their own, or did you have to give them a little bit of prompts in terms of this is what I did just to help jumpstart their memory?
I didn't. I didn't even know that that was an option to like give people a template or give them bullet points. Maybe reflecting back, I should have. I had a really good relationship with my old boss and my old professor. So they didn't need me to like, write anything for them. I have heard that that's more popular now. People ask for bullet points or people ask you to draft your recommendation. It depends on who you're asking. It's better when it comes through the person that knows you through their words. So even if you are giving some suggestions, I would say don't overdo it. Don't do it like your friend, because you want it to sound authentic and you want the admission committee to understand who you are and how other people view you.
Can I just add one thing because it just
Yeah.
jumped at me? Someone who was applying to INSEAD asked me this, where they were
Mhm.
like, well, does it matter how senior the person who is writing your recommendation is in the company? In the sense, does it look very credible, or does it improve my application if the CEO of the company writes it as opposed to my own manager or the director? And what I told them, I think something that you have reiterated now is the closer you work with the person, the better that recommendation would be and the more authentic it would be. So instead of going after the title and the seniority, I would still prioritize reaching out to people that you have worked with so that they can truly give their right feedback as opposed to something that is crafted by you and that they then put in. So authenticity, I think, is very underrated. And I wanted to mention that because someone had asked me that a couple of years ago.
So it's important to find someone that you have touch points with. Let's talk about the final battle, which is you submit your application and then hopefully you get asked back for interviews. So I'll talk about the CERN interview process. It was very relaxed, very conversational. I felt like the interviewer was just looking to learn about who I was as an individual, I'm applying to Stern and why this is the right time for me. I think it's important in interviews if it's more conversational to be very natural. I tried to emphasize my personality. I would do research before you go on the interview, see what they're looking for so that you have good bullet points to talk through throughout the interview. What about you?
Well, my experience was slightly similar-ish in the sense the conversation flowed very easily, but the key difference was, well, there were actually two different aspects of the interviews. The first one was more as part of the application process. So when I just submitted the application, immediately afterwards, INSEAD would prompt you to do 4 pre-recorded computer interview. So it would give you 45 seconds. It would flash a question, give you 45 seconds to think about your response, and then 60 seconds to respond. And the questions are very stereotypical, right? Something that you've already worked on in your application and something that you're prepping for your interview as well, in terms of why INSEAD, tell me about a time when you failed, tell me about a time when you reacted not so well at work, and so on and so forth. So I don't know how those prompts have changed, but they were very generic in terms of things that you would prep for when you were applying for business school. One thing that I was told was that when the admissions committee is looking at these pre-recorded interview as part of your application, they really care about how you emote and how you express and how your personality comes across. So they actually mute it and then watch it once and then unmute it and then watch it again.
That's
Which,
crazy.
which is so interesting, right? Because when you really think about it, it's so essential. We all focus on the content that we want to talk about, but we never really think about what will be my hand gestures, what will my face look like. And that's such an important part of your personality. So a tip for all the listeners here would be, while you're focusing on the content for these video interviews, also think about your eye contact, your hand gestures, your nodding, and all of that stuff. That's super important. And I think it does make quite an impression.
Yeah, I'll just add, I didn't have this for Stern. I had it for another school. And as you were talking about this, I remember what I did is I had my partner actually sit on the other side of the table. So the computer's, I'm looking at the computer, I'm looking at the prompt, and I have him on the other side. So it looks like I'm having a conversation with someone, or I can act like he's the one interviewing me because you're more natural when you're talking to a person than when you're looking at a computer screen. So that might help someone if you have one of these. I wouldn't stress too much about the computer simulated interview. I think the in person interview is more important. Tell me about what the interview process was in person for INSEAD.
So, very different. It was 2 interviews with the alumni, and it was great in the sense that you get to connect with 2 people that have been to school. It was very seamless. They already had my application, so I had to basically send the application and my resume to them. So they went through it, and then we met for a coffee. And the questions were so conversational. It was around why INSEAD, what have you been doing in your life so far? What do you plan to do? But it never really felt like an interview. It felt like a chat. And then I had an opportunity to ask them about their INSEAD experience. So I think one thing that we forget about when we are going through the application process is that it's not just the school that's interviewing you. Throughout the process, you're basically interviewing the school as well, or just getting to know whether it's a good fit or not, in terms of whether you like their application process, whether you like their questions, whether you like the interactions. So don't take it too seriously and don't put that pressure on yourself to say, oh shit, the school is really going at me and I need to be like XYZ. Ask your questions to the school, whether that's the admissions committee, whether that's your interviewer, and really take the time to sort of get to know whether it's a good fit.
I agree. I think you need to really go into the interview more calm and be more conversational. I know that's easier said than done because we're talking about this reflecting back, but I'm sure we were in a panic before the interview. I just say through applying and getting into business school and going to business school. You just have to fake it until you make it. That's my motto. That's what gets me through it. All right. That's a wrap for today. The business school application process is a lot, but remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being authentically you.
Exactly. You're not just applying to school, you are sharing your story. So you have to own it and don't be afraid to ask for help.
If you found this helpful, please rate, subscribe, share this with someone who is deep in the business school application process. See you next time on We Should Talk About This.